and begin tonight. We are going to finish up the 5th chapter of the book of Amos. You've got your outline there. So we're going to take first verses 10 through 13. So let's read Amos 5, 10 through 13. It says, "They hate him who reproves in the gate, and they abhor him who speaks with integrity. Therefore, because you impose heavy rent on the poor, and exact a tribute of grain from them, though you have built houses of well-hewn stone, yet you will not live in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, yet you will not drink of their wine. For I know your transgressions are many, and your sins are great. You who distress the righteous and accept bribes, and turn aside the poor in the gate. Therefore, at such a time, the prudent person keeps silent, for it is an evil time." All right, so what Amos is saying, he's, of course, continuing on the difficulty that occurred in Israel, particularly centered in Samaria, the capital, about just the absolute unrighteous, corrupt treatment of people, especially the poor, the disadvantaged, those that didn't have as much. So what he's saying is the desire for maximum profit was so extreme by the wealthy in their mistreatment of the poor that they constantly paid bribes to the judges to have the case handled to their benefit. That's what he's saying. Yeah. And what he's talking about, the gate, you see where he talks about the gate there in that verse? The town's legal matters would be decided, of course, by the elders of the city in rooms in the gate structure of each town. In other words, the gate wasn't just a door. Usually was a structure, and it had certain rooms in it, anterooms. And they would go there, and issues of legal jurisprudence would be settled there by the, quote, elders of the town. What he's saying is the game was completely rigged from the beginning. They were bribed, and therefore the outcome was assured of the case. Okay? Doesn't sound probably a lot different from today, because certainly that kind of thing goes on. At the end, in verse 13, he says a very interesting and tragic thing. He says that no one who advocated for real justice would be listened to because the bribes were so common. And it became dangerous to speak the truth. Thus, the few righteous simply became quiet. That's what he's saying in verse 13. It became dangerous to not go along with the corruption, not go along with the system. Okay? Anybody ever seen anything going on like that in this culture today?
Not a chance.
You know, again,
you've been living in an ice cream store.
It's become in this country very dangerous to speak the truth. People are being attacked. There's protests. People are ruining people's meals and gathering in restaurants. You know, there's all this kind of insanity going on.
Bricks, beating up old people.
Yeah, I mean, because again, you dare not speak the truth, because if you speak it, people end up in this culture now becoming violent. And this is exactly what was going on in the same way at this time in Israel. It was a violent time. You didn't go against the system of corruption or, okay. So, the system of complex corruption grew larger and larger, and the profits multiplied to these people, to the corrupt. So, of course, they built larger and more elaborate homes and larger and more elaborate vineyards. Okay? God says, don't even worry about getting comfortable living in them, because you ain't going to be there very long. That's his answer to this. And, of course, I can't help when I think about the system of legal corruption and the, through the graft system, building larger homes. Has anybody been recently traveled through the suburbs of Washington, D.C.? Ever looked at the building? Why does that town always seem to have more and more new building going on? Why do we always seem to have bigger and bigger homes being built there?
Look here Ohio. I mean, they have the parade homes every year. They can't get bigger and better and fancier, and they got every twirl and
No.
swirl. And,
But the amount of money
yeah.
that goes through Washington, D.C.,
Oh, yeah.
with all of the, people that advocate for every imaginable group there is, and all the money paid to influence politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a massive corruption fund going on all the time.
How many times do we see in the paper on the internet? I mean, little local people who are tiny little mayors or whatever, they're corrupt. Or, a ball team, somebody steals the money. I mean, come on. It is everywhere.
It is. I think, Norman, I can't remember if you said this to me one time, because I think one time we were talking about the Delaware County court system.
Oh, yes, we were.
Okay.
And yes, it was me.
And I'm pretty certain you said, just remember, the cases that occur before that court get decided in Bum's Restaurant on Monday morning. Now that's a good way to put it, isn't it?
Right.
It isn't really the merits of the case that are the issue.
The person that, in regards to what I was talking about, was not directly the judge, but then there is a person working under the judge, and that person's, the definition of that person other than criminal, because that's the person getting the money.
Yep.
And
Well, what about the two, the pros and cons, the two lawyers? They get together and discuss this. I mean,
well, if you go to Ohio State University or Capital, take your choice, and you sit down and listen to the professors teach law today, they teach absolutely never, ever go to trial.
Yeah.
If you look at criminals, it's plea agreement. If you look at civil cases, get the money paid. I guess what was the lady that was an announcer, and she stayed at the Marriott, and this guy was chasing her, and Marriott let the guy in next door, and he put in a peephole and saw her taking a shower. And it was the Marriott that got sued. I can't remember her name, but she was an announcer and announced football games and stuff.
oh, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
So the end result was that she had an option. And as Marriott, I don't know if you all know this, but Marriott is owned and run by the Mormons.
Well, I didn't.
100% of the Marriott is owned by the Mormon Church and run by the Mormons.
Did not know that.
So the president of Marriott met with her attorney and said she hasn't got enough time in life or money to go through the court that we'll put her through. And therefore, you either take what we offer you or there will be nothing.
Yeah.
So she signed off on that.
That's the court system.
That is the court system. That's exactly what you're talking about here this evening.
Yep. Okay, let's look at verses 14 to 15.
You know the problem? They've never heard the term "kiss my,"
Well,
and that's strange.
Well, actually, read the next verse, number 14.
yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Let's read 14 to 15. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. And thus may the Lord God of hosts be with you. Just as you've said, hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. Perhaps the Lord your God of hosts may be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. All right, now, again, Amos returns in this chiastic structure now to the issue of personal repentance. Here's the evil. Here's the need for repentance. So he instructs them, it would be best for you to repent. If you would seek good and not evil, then you could gain God's favor. Now, there's a very interesting element to what they're saying here, and you have to kind of read it carefully. In verse 14, let me read 14 again, okay? admonishing them, seek good and not evil that you may live. Then they say, okay, and thus may the Lord God of hosts be with you, just as you have said. In other words, he's saying, you keep saying this. The Lord is with us. The Lord is with us. The Lord is with us. All right? And of course, he's saying to them, no, he's not. Not based on what you're doing. This Lord is with us. I want to show you some examples of it, okay? Turn to Numbers 23. Numbers chapter 23.
Excuse myself and go to the car and get my other glasses.
Okay.
I'm getting to the point I can't
Can't read it.
My
23.
glasses are too dark.
What's the verse?
Numbers 23 in verse 21. He has not observed misfortune in Jacob, nor has he seen trouble in Israel. The Lord his God is with him, and the shouting of the king is among them. You see, the Lord is with us. The Lord is with us. Well, there was a promise. We're seeing it here in Numbers that the Lord be with them. But that promise was conditional. It wasn't the Lord's with you, Israel, based on anything you do. No. Okay, and that's what Amos is saying. You know, you act like you're going to get the blessing of God because you're Israel. That's not the way it works.
Isn't people say that a lot, though, even today? God be with you.
Well, they say God be with you, but their mantra is not that. Their mantra was, no matter what, we're the special people that are going to be protected. God is with us. That's what they were saying. Okay, turn from Numbers over to Deuteronomy.
We're chosen no matter what.
No matter what, that was their attitude. You know, we're the children of Abraham. Deuteronomy chapter 20. You'll see the reiteration of this in verse 4. And this is God talking about in the context of warfare. Okay? And he's saying, verse 4, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. Now, that's true. If they were in the will of God, doing what God asked them to do, then he was. But think of the story of the first battle at Ai. Was God with them then? No. And they were defeated. So they could only be successful when they truly were doing the will of God. It wasn't a universal, God's going to be with us no matter what. Let me show you a third one. Go to Isaiah chapter 8. Turn to your right pretty far there to Isaiah chapter 8. And I want to show you verse 10. He says, devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. State a proposal, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Same story. So this is what they're saying, okay, basically to Amos. When he's telling them, this is what's going to happen to you, they're going, God is with us. Nothing's going to happen to us. You know? And so this is the meaning back here in Amos chapter 5. So,
I'm glad you're interpreting this.
Now, we see, of course, that Amos insisted that this idea, God is always with us, was a delusion. For the people have conveniently forgotten many, many teachings in the Bible. For instance, as we said, what about the sin of Achan? Okay, in Joshua chapter 7. Was God with them then? No. What about all that we've read about Deuteronomy chapter 28? The blessings and the cursings. Does that guarantee God was with them? Absolutely not. You know, it was very conditional. So they conveniently forgot all these things. All right, now let's look at verses 16 through 17. Let's read them. Therefore, thus says the Lord God of hosts, the Lord, there is wailing in all the plazas, and in all the streets they say, alas, alas. They also call the farmer to mourning, and professional mourners to lamentation. And in all the vineyards there's wailing, because I shall pass through the midst of you, says the Lord. Now let's take this apart. Again, in this poetic style that Amos has, he reminds them of the predictable outcome of the nation's sin would be a staggering death toll. And this would assuredly occur. So many people would die that there'd be not enough professional mourners for the funerals. And they'd have to then go recruit the farmers to come in from the fields to do mourning. That's the level of death that's going to occur. That's what he's telling them. You have not seen, he's telling them, the level of funerals that are going to occur. You know? So, he also tells them that the sounds of death and grief would be everywhere. They'd be in the city, they'd be in the vineyards, they'd be out in the country. It would be all over. No one would escape that.
This is again about the Syrian invasion.
Yes. Then he makes a very interesting allusion, and you'll see it in the end of verse 17, because I shall pass through the midst of you.
Yeah.
Now,
For Passover, angel of death.
Exactly. He's saying, just like I passed through Egypt, and they died because they didn't listen to me or let you go, I'm going to pass through you, and you're going to die. So, very ominous allusion he makes here by saying this. A reference to that, of course, would be Exodus 11, verses 4 through 7. The causing of death, the passing through. All right. So now, let's look at verses 18 through 20. He says, Alas, you who are longing for the day of the Lord, for what purpose will the day of the Lord be to you? It will be darkness and not light. And when a man flees from a lion and a bear meets him, or goes home, leans his hand against the wall, and a snake bites him, will not the day of the Lord be darkness instead of light, even with no brightness, even gloom with no brightness in it? So what he's saying, in the Hebrew, if you look at the Hebrew word where he says, alas, starting in verse 18, it's actually a technical word in Hebrew. It's the Hebrew word hoy. And the word hoy means wailing over the dead. So he's calling a death wail. Hoy. Hoy. Okay? It's coming. Funerals, death are coming. Then he addresses those who are, quote, looking forward to the day of the Lord, which they mistakenly believe will be a salvation for them. And he's telling them, no, no, no. The day of the Lord for you will be darkness and death and gloom. It will not be your salvation. That's not what the day of the Lord is going to mean for you. Then, of course, he gives them a very almost humorous but interesting analogy. He says, let me show you what this is going to be like for you. He says, your future is so inevitable at this point that it's like a guy who's chased by a lion who barely escapes. Then just when he's done with that, he's followed by a bear who's after him. And then when he barely escapes the bear, he goes home thinking he's in safety, puts his hand on his garden wall, and a poisonous snake bites him and kills him.
Right.
He says, that's what that's what it's going to be like for you. It is inevitable that you are not going to survive at this point. You know? Now remember, he's saying this 40 years before it occurs to one of the most prosperous, wealthy times in all of Israel. Life was good. Everything was busting. The economy was going great. The wealthy were getting wealthier. Of course, the poor were getting poorer, you know, but that didn't matter to them, you know. They were accumulating goods, building houses of stone, building vineyards. I mean, it was the good days.
Amos probably had a reputation of a mental case.
Yeah. He's saying all this, and of course, you can see no wonder 1 in 10 will only survive. Only 1 in 10 is even going to seriously think he could be correct about this at all, you know. This seems like lunacy to them to hear this. So this is the condition they were in. Okay, verses 21 through 25. He then goes on and he says, I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer up to me burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. And I will not even look at the peace offerings of your fatlings. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the sound of your harps. And let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream. Okay? And then 25. Did you present me with sacrifice and grain offerings in the wilderness for 40 years, O house of Israel? So, what he's talking about here is that God is saying through Amos that he is absolutely, completely disgusted with their religious activities and their complete hypocrisy. They come and have festivals, okay? But he's saying here in verse 21, if you read it again, he says, I do not delight. In Hebrew it means I can't tolerate the smell of, is what he's saying. In other words, he's talking about two things, and I'll show you what they are. Turn back, hold your hand here in Amos, but turn back to Leviticus chapter 1. I'll give you the specific thing that God's referring to. Leviticus chapter 1. This is where God through Moses, is instructing them about the sacrificial system that he's setting up for the Jews, okay? So, Leviticus 1 verse 9. Here we're talking about the burnt offering, okay? The animal that's sacrificed, and part of it is burnt on the altar as an offering. And in verse 9 he tells them how to do it, what to do, what not to do. And he says, its entrails, however, and its legs he shall wash with water, and the priest shall offer up in smoke all of it on the altar for the burnt offering, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to the Lord. Okay? So, properly done, correctly done, with the right attitude, this was a, quote, pleasing aroma to God. Make sense? Mm-hmm. But he's saying the very same thing done with the wrong attitude, with injustice and unrighteousness and hypocrisy, is completely disgusting, and he didn't want to smell it. Okay? Then he goes on to peace offerings. Okay? So turn to Leviticus, go next chapter, go to Leviticus chapter 2, and look at verse 2. So he talks about the grain offering. And he says, he shall then bring it to the sons of Aaron, the priests, and shall take from it his handful of the fine flour and its oil with all of its frankincense. So they put this combination together. And the priest shall offer it up in smoke as its memorial portion on the altar, an offering by fire of a soothing aroma to the Lord. So when they make the sacrifice of bringing a certain amount of the grain as a thank offering to the Lord, when they do it this way with a thankful attitude, God says it's pleasant to him. It's not like he needs to smell it, obviously, but they're doing it as a sacrifice with the right attitude, and it's pleasant. Okay? And in this case, he's referring to both the burnt offering and the grain offering and saying it literally stinks to high heavens. If you want to put it that way, that would be a pretty accurate way to describe what he's saying here. There's no sincere or genuine attitude of worship, because their attitude is completely selfish in how they live. They're not concerned about their fellow person. They're not concerned about justice. So they go through these religious motions, but it means nothing to God. Then, of course, he says, then you go and play the flute and you sing songs, and he says, that just is disgusting to me. It's unacceptable. I don't want to hear it. And then he goes on, back to Amos, chapter 5, and he says, what he really wants to see. And of course, that's verse 24. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream. He says, that's what I want to see from you in your behavior and your attitudes. Not all this, ceremony that you're doing. Now, he then makes the statement in 25, did you present me with sacrifices and grain offerings in the wilderness for 40 years? The answer would be no. Because many times they didn't have the means to do that in that desertous climate for 40 years. But his point is, did I not accept you? Did I not bless you? Yes. All right? Even though you were wandering, I kept you, I provided for you. So you didn't have the means to do the sacrifices necessarily, but I still accepted you. Okay, now, this brings up a very interesting element that I think we can't help but discuss today. Again, what's the parallel to our culture? Today, we find that the left, the political left in this country, in the universities, in protest groups, in the schools, in government, or especially in the Democratic Party particularly, are all about the social justice movement. All you hear about is the social justice movement, which is part of why they're advocating absolute socialism. Okay? The universities that are teaching socialism, the schools are teaching socialism. Okay? The Democratic Party is promoting socialism. Why?
Control.
That's part of it, but there's another reason why.
Because they don't learn history.
That's right. They don't learn from history. And of course,
They don't know anything about history.
That's true. They're not taught history.
They are not taught.
It's all been changed and revised, eliminated, selected out. That's true. But there's one more thing. Okay? They're selectively picking what they think is just, but on what basis and value system?
Most convenient for them.
Right. You see, God's talking about here in Amos the need for social justice, but he's defining the value system. It's based on his character. I am just, you should be just. I tell the truth, you should tell the truth. I don't take advantage of people and rip them off, you shouldn't do that. So it's his basis of his own character that is defining their behavior. But when you have a social justice movement that doesn't have a moral base to it,
Double standard.
right, then what you get is an arbitrary, I look at you and I say, you have too nice a car. It should be sold and given to the poor. Your clothes are too nice. You need to get rid of those. And you see what I'm saying? It's this arbitrary picking at things and saying that doesn't fit our concept of justice.
It should be, everybody be the same, so to speak.
That's what socialism is.
Right.
See, they're advocating socialism because, like my wife just said, having grown up under that system in Russia, they're so stupid they don't understand that it means poverty for everyone.
But they're the exception.
Yeah. Well, they think they are because, of course, there's always an elite that run it. The elite get rich and make out well and have the nice houses, or they say, power to the people.
Yeah, right.
Isn't this exactly what Lenin did?
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
How did he get a revolution going, honey? What did he stir up? How did he do it? Trotsky.
Yeah, the attractive idea of everyone being equal.
Exactly. He said it's wrong that the Tsar has more than you. It's wrong that he has these palace homes. It's wrong that he accumulates wealth. He kept hitting on.
And yet Lenin himself was pretty from wealthy family. He always lived very wealthy life, and he was subsidized and invested from the Germany.
Yeah.
Then Germany was interested.
Yeah.
Germany was interested for Russia to be destroyed.
Absolutely.
After World War I.
That's what motivated Lenin.
They want Russia to prosper, so they invested money into revolution.
They paid for it.
you know, as much as I've studied history, that's enlightening. I have not read that part about Lenin.
You should also study.
You're talking and bringing it to my
I'll
attention.
tell you more.
There's
I know more.
I'm
No,
sure you do.
really.
I'm sure you do.
a long.
But no, this is not what they taught us at school. Trust me.
Oh, I'm sure.
Totally different. What they taught.
Lenin was an angel, of course. He was he was the Messiah. He was
He was the idol.
the idol.
The idol.
That's why his body is still sitting
We're supposed to, you know,
in the Kremlin.
Yeah.
Well, there's a point to be made in relationship to Germany because after World War II, they didn't teach anything to the public as to what and how it occurred and what happened to the Jews during Hitler's dominance.
Right.
So what's the difference in what they taught in Germany versus what she just mentioned and experienced?
Yeah. The point is
the same.
Yeah. The point is that when you go back and study the revolutions that have occurred, especially in the last 100 or so years, the playbook is always the same.
Always the same.
You stir up the masses and you say, that group is unfair. That group has too much. That group oppresses you. That group discriminates against you. Let's go to the streets.
Well, that's what's happening here.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. It's the same playbook. Social justice leads to two things. Well, more than two. Number one, eventually the poverty of the masses, okay, the accumulation of power in the elite, and no justice. That's its conclusion. Follow it with Mao, follow it with Lenin and Trotsky, go through whoever you want to.
Hitler was the richest
Exactly.
person in the world.
Absolutely.
When he took control. He was
So,
the richest person in the world.
So this is always the delusion of the masses. They hear this stuff and they go, oh yeah, you're right. Let's make everyone equal. And of course, my thing, if I talk to them, is good. Let's start with your bank account then.
Right, in New York.
Your car is a little bit too expensive, I think, here. And that guy doesn't have what you have. So would you please sell it? Well, I'm not going to do that. Right. You believe in socialism. Right.
Yeah.
You believe in the convenient idea of socialism.
Right, right.
Okay? But we're seeing it today in the news, on the campuses, in protests. I'm afraid it's going to get bigger and bigger,
Well,
not less and less.
The first woman was just elected. Where was that? Just in the last week or so. And she's definitely a socialist. For the Senate?
You talk about the congresswoman in
Yeah.
New York?
Yeah.
Yeah. She's an interesting story, too. She ran on the
Talk about
basis.
the young lady.
Yeah.
The Hispanic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
She ran on the basis that she was a poor, discriminated against young woman that never had anything, and the power to the people, and let's go change this country and make it right for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Then when they started to dig, they found out she came from a wealthy family
Yeah.
and went to like Brown or
Oh, really?
some exclusive university. Oh yeah, this poor thing, And it's just,
Well, she was right.
I was going to say, we're talking about semantics because the person Shen seated in the Democratic Party had been there over 10 years and came up through that same system and he propagated that same system.
Yeah.
And she ran in a fashion. The one thing I command respect for, he had the Democratic money, he had the Democratic Party, and she didn't have either one.
Right.
And her social group helped put her on.
That is true.
That's true.
So now, from that point, it will be interesting to see how she votes and if she can even manage being in the House of Representatives. I mean, there's 32 people in the House of Representatives.
435, right.
435, okay. She got to scream awful loud. She got to do
Yeah.
a whole lot of protesting.
Okay, now, let's finish this off with verses 26 and 27.
Yeah, but this is interesting.
Now,
Finishing off.
these are challenging verses because they have words in them that we're not familiar with. And you really have to go back not only into the Hebrew, but you have to go back even into information about cultures to understand what Amos is saying here. Now, first, keep in mind, this section, remember, has a chiastic structure, that it ends where it begins, right? So in verse 8, the first section that we stopped in, verse 8, it ended with talking about the Mazzaroth, right?
Yes.
Now keep that in mind as we go through what we're going to see in verses 26 and 27. So I'll read it, and you're going to go, what does that mean? Okay? He says, you also carried along Sukkoth, your king, and Kion, your images, the star of your gods, which you made for yourselves. Therefore I will make you go into exile beyond Damascus, says the Lord God, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Now, let's break this down. First to the Hebrew. Sukkoth really is a tongue-in-cheek word here. Remember, he just got done talking about he hated their festivals. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the most famous festivals, of course, in the Jewish in Jewish tradition is, of course, is Sukkot, Sukkot. So he's using a tongue-in-cheek word here, although Sukkoth is a very specific thing. The word Sukkoth means a tent or a booth. And when it's used, it usually is in relationship to astronomy. The heavens is its typical context. So what he's saying is, it implies in the context the astral plane of astrology, or the, quote, like astrologers call it, the tent of the zodiac. That's what he's talking about. So he's saying what you're really focusing on is astrology. Now, then he goes on and says, your king. The word is Malak, and it means that, and he says that he is the object of your worship. Now, keep that in mind for a moment, and let's go to the next word. Then he says the word Kion. Okay? Now, Kion in Hebrew means an image. But more specifically, in a whole variety of Semitic languages, Kion refers to the planet Saturn. Now, this becomes, I think, quite interesting. And in a minute, I'll explain the connection here. But it's the planet Saturn. Then he says, you worship your images. In Hebrew, it's the word sahalem, and it means a shadowy thing or a phantom or something demonic. Therefore, he's telling them their real focus of worship was using astrology to focus on the planet Saturn, which is a demonic image. That's, in essence, what he's telling them they're doing. You follow? You put it all together? Okay. Now, then he says, he talks about the star of your gods. This is the Hebrew phrase, Kauhab Elohim. And it means, literally, the study of your gods, or it's an idiom in Hebrew for a stargazer. Someone who studies the stars, the planetary and system, okay, of specifically the fallen angels.
Well, that's worth $1 million sitting here just hearing that. Can you bring that out even more so?
Let me go on, okay? So you get the idea here. He's saying you are studying the planetary astrology system. Your study, literally, because the study of astrology, in reality, is the study of the fallen angels. That's what it's all about. And they're named by planets, you know. And so let's go into, because this is all included in mythology. So let me go into some of this. Why is the study of the planet Saturn important? Well, let me give you some examples. In Roman culture, Saturn was the god of wealth, freedom, and time. The Persians studied Saturn. They called him Zervan. The Iranian name for Saturn is Yima. The Hindu name is Yama. And the Chinese emperor, pronounce it, dear.
It's
Huangdi.
Huangdi.
Okay. The Chinese emperor Huangdi, who was alleged to be the founder of Taoism, also had as his symbol or crescent the planet Saturn. Now, it's interesting. In the Greek, Saturn was called the star of Helios and was considered superior to the sun god. So they considered Saturn more powerful and more significant astrologically even than the sun and the worship of the sun. Notice that in Roman religious tradition, in the third week of December, they had a festival called Saturnalia, which of course today in the Western world we call Christmas. Now, early on in religious astrological study of Saturn, it was associated. Let me say one more thing. If you and I stopped here because I could go on and on and on. I mean, I read article after article about the connection of Saturn to astrology, culture after culture. It is consistent with the Aztecs. It is consistent with the Mayans. It is consistent with the Easter Island people. I mean, you go through the world, the Babylonians, the Zoroastrians, go anywhere to any religious culture you want to, and you will see a preoccupation with a study of Saturn. It's worldwide. But it's very interesting because the Greeks originally called the sun Saturn because they said it was superior to the sun. So there's some force, okay, that they considered that was behind Saturn that was more astrologically important even than sun worship was. That's basically what they're saying. And this is repeated not just by the Greeks. Other cultures did this too. They considered Saturn the prominent figure to study.
How do they see it? Given where Saturn's positioned.
We can see it in the sky.
Yeah, but, you know, unless you have today a tremendous piece of material that allows you to see, going back to what you're talking about, I mean, with the naked eye, somebody's got to be selling the socialism big time.
Well, they couldn't see it like we see it. I mean, even with the telescope we have sitting out there in the dining room, you can actually see the rings of Saturn, okay? But they didn't have that, all right? But they were intense studiers of the heavens. The Babylonian system of astrology and astronomy was extremely complex. I mean, books upon books upon books upon books upon books they produced about all the movements of the planets. I mean, very precise measurements. Okay? Remember, let's go back to the real beginning of this. What was the Tower of Babel? What was on the top of it? Why did it reach into the heavens? No, yes, but what was on the top of it? The zodiac. It was an astrological study tower. That's what the Tower of Babel was. From the very beginning, Nimrod was studying astrology because it was associated with the fallen angels and the powers of the fallen angels. It was Satan's way. It's his counter-corrupt system to the Mazzaroth. Why do astrologers study the positions of the stars and the planets? To predict future events in people's lives, astrology. To gain information from the heavens in the wrong way.
Right. That's kind of such a hooey, isn't it?
No, it's not if it's done by people that have satanic power, that have occultic power. They can derive information because they get it from the demonic.
Are we talking about Ghostbusters?
No, I'm
Something way more than that.
I'm thinking about, in the paper every day they have your.
Oh, of course, that's, but I'm talking about the people that really study these powers.
I understood
Okay.
what you were saying.
Where do you define the fallen angels in correlation to the heavens as we look at it?
Do you really want to go there?
Yeah. Okay. Let me just say this. Yeah, we could get into a whole long trail there, but what in the book of Revelation, I think in chapter 6, I'd have to look again, but it talks about at one point the stars of heaven falling to the earth. Do you remember the reference?
Do I? No.
You want me to find it? I think it's in 6. Let me look.
Remember that? She remembers.
All right.
That's why I married her.
That's why I married. That's right.
Stick with her, she has this answer.
Let me
Yeah.
tell you, I can
Okay.
that from being
It's Revelation 6. Let me start in 12. And I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, which is understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Huge amount of dust is thrown into the atmosphere. And he says, and the whole moon became like blood, which is consistent. Okay. And the stars of the sky fell to the earth. The word there is not the name for the stars that we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's the name of beings, angels.
Oh.
Okay? They fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by the wind. In other words, that ain't the way you want it to happen. That's not the way you want it. You want ripe figs at the right time that you take off. You don't want unripe ones falling all over the place, right? That's chaos. Well, what he's saying is that when Satan finally brings this whole thing to the crescendo in the last 7 years of the tribulation period, he's going to let these fallen angel entities come down on the planet.
Do they exist on the planet today?
No,
At all?
they do not exist on the planet today. Now, Satan himself does in the sense that he has entrance to it, but they do not. Now, why? You say, why do I know that? Read the 9th chapter of Revelation. What did God do when 200 of them tried to come down on the face of the earth? Okay? In the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis. What did he do? He locked them up. You remember the story in Revelation 9?
She does.
He puts them in the abyss. He says, you're not allowed to go on the surface of the earth. You're in the abyss until they are released during the tribulation period.
Where I get caught up is with all the garbage that Satan does. How is he doing himself by himself without having help?
Well,
Because there's actually angels here that are good angels supporting God.
there are, but he also has another entity that he works with. They're called the demons. And they are on the earth, and they are everywhere.
So what are the demons?
The demons are when the Nephilim died in the flood. Okay? They were fallen angelic spirits combined with human bodies, the giants, right? When their bodies died in the flood, drowned, it trapped their fallen angelic spirit on the earth.
The flood did.
The flood did, because the bodies died. But they were trapped as entities. Those are what we call the demons. See, the angels and the demons are different entities. Okay?
So that's where the demons are today.
Yeah, and that's why they're called the earth. That's why they're called, well, for instance, they're called the Rapha in Hebrew. They're called the dead, the dead of the earth, the dead of the ground, the dead that will never rise. There's many phrases that are used in the Hebrew about them.
Next breed.
Yes, correct. That is right. Now, here's an interesting fact to show you about Saturn. one of Saturn's most common symbols is the six-pointed star. Okay? If you will notice, it is two opposing triangles that are slightly overlapped. That's the six-pointed star. Okay? It is a perpetual satanic symbol of the Freemasons, of Kabbalah, of, you can go on and on and on. Occult worship, Black Sabbath, all these things.
You can read about it in Wikipedia.
No,
it's not originally Jewish thing at all.
That's what I'm telling you, is that the Star of David, the six-pointed star, was not known to Jewish tradition prior to World War II. Try to find any place in Jewish literature where they used a six-pointed star. They did not. See, we get confused. We think, well, that's the Star of David. No. The six-pointed star was a yellow star made by Hitler that every Jew had to wear.
Now, the 50-cent question is, given Hitler's background,
in the Thule Society.
Huh?
In the Thule Society.
Well, originally he was an altar boy for the Catholic Church.
But by the age 22 or 23, he was a member of the Thule Society, which is a cult, okay. But think about it. He put six pointed yellow stars and made every single Jew wear them. So what did that mean? It means they were his sacrifice to Satan. They wore it. That's why.
I never understood that.
That's a little bit startling. As much as I've studied about that,
When they were wearing the stars, did they know?
No.
I had no clue.
No. All they knew is it was one more thing they were required to do. But he knew it because, again, who motivated him?
And all they knew, they're going to be killed.
Yeah. Who motivated him? The devil. What was the devil doing? He was trying to eradicate Israel. Why? Because 3 years after World War II, God's plan was Israel becomes a nation again and starts the whole last era of Earth history. So he was trying to get rid of them.
Why would Israel still use that?
That I don't know. I don't know why they adopted. I would think it would offend them beyond.
That's like an evil thing.
Yeah.
Why would they use that?
I think, of course, most of Israel is agnostic, remember. They don't understand the Old Testament, most of them. Only the Orthodox do. They don't teach the Old Testament. Most of them are just cultural Jews.
Yeah, right.
No, but if I was I am a Jew, but partly, but it would be immensely offensive to wear a six-sided star.
You have a little bit of Jewish blood in you.
I have a quarter of Jewish blood in me, yeah. So basically, in summary, Amos is stating here that the northern kingdom, because of its worship, which we now see through these words, is occult in nature, okay? They weren't worshiping the Lord, but they had incorporated occultism into their worship, and therefore their festivals were not true festivals. They were occult-based festivals, and therefore they had descended to this depth. And this is why they were going to get the level of judgment that they were going to get. See, it starts with the Mazzaroth that Amos teaches in verse 8, and in the chiastic structure it ends with the counter-truth, the occult and the zodiac. Interesting, isn't it? How it's structured.
How much have you studied on this Freemason business?
A lot. A lot.
You made a statement about the position of the Jews today in Jerusalem. What is the statement you would make with regard to the Freemasons in our society today by comparison?
Well, this opens up a huge potential can of worms, but
Not with me, but
maybe later we should talk about it more, okay?
Afterwards.
But I
study
think,
it a whole month.
well, it is, it's like many different cult groups. The people at the bottom know not very much. The people at the top know the real truth. And that's the structure of Freemasonry, the 33rd degree group. So, at any rate, now, there's one more tie-in, but I don't know if you want me to spend the time to do it.
How much time?
Just a few minutes.
Full train.
Okay. The language of verse 26 is extremely similar to another passage in the Old Testament. So I was going to take you to that passage and show you the tie-in. And that passage is Daniel chapter 8, verse 10. So turn back from Amos a little bit to Daniel. Now I'm going to do the same thing for you. I'm going to read verse...
What'd you say, chapter 8?
Chapter 8, and we're going to read verse 10. We'll read it, and then I'm going to tear it apart through the Hebrew and show you, okay? Mm-hmm. Now, this is a vision that Daniel's given, and it's called the vision of the ram, the goat, and the little horn. All right? Now, the little horn here, the small horn, you will learn. I'm just going to give this to you because I can't teach the whole chapter to you. This speaks of the person whose name is Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the king of the Seleucid kingdom, which would have been, he was king starting about 174 BC. So the Greek kingdom is split. The four generals took their four parts. One of the generals was named Seleucus. So every one of them had their own then, kings that followed and their sons and the sons' sons and the whole deal of monarchies. He is king in 174 BC. That says, let's read it, and then I'll tear it apart for you. And it's referring to the horn, Antiochus, okay, grew up to the host of heaven, and caused some of the host and some of the stars to fall to the earth, and it trampled them down. And in verse 11, it, the horn, even magnified itself to be equal with the commander of the host, and it removed the regular sacrifice for him, and the place of his sanctuary was thrown down. Now, let's go through this. It grew great, the horn. It's the word gadol in Hebrew, and it means to be enlarged or to become arrogant, to magnify oneself, okay? To gain power and influence. And he says that, again, the next word, he says it grew up to the host of heaven. The host, we've said this word before, Tasaba. And the word Tasaba means angelic group or angelic army. So he grew in power in relationship to the angelic army. Now the question you've got to ask yourself is which angelic army? Because there's two angelic armies, right? There's a fallen one and there's God's. All right? Now, then it says next, and caused some of the host, as we said, Tasaba, of heaven. The word heaven is the word Shemaim, and it means the abode of the stars, the sky, the visible heaven, the planets, and the stars. It does not mean the spiritual universe. It means the astronomy of heaven, or in this case, more likely, the astrology of heaven. And then it says, and caused some of the host, the Tasaba, of the stars to fall to earth. The word, or be cast down. The word to be cast down or fall is the word nafal. It means to come down, to fall down, or to attack, like in a predator. And of course, where it's the root word for what? The group we call the Nephilim,
I've not gotten that one.
the fallen ones. Okay, that's where the root is. Nephal is why they're called the Nephilim.
Really?
Yeah, they fall down from heaven. They come down to the earth. Okay. Now it says that some of the host, again, Tasaba, angelic beings. Then it says some of the stars to fall to the earth. The word stars is the word kokon, and it means a blazing star or a stargazer or a student of the stars. That is astrology. Okay? So these entities then fall to the earth. The word earth is the word eretz, and it means the land, the ground, the whole earth. Okay? And it says then, as a result, it trampled them down. The word trampled is the word ramak, and it means to trample, to destroy, or to oppress and persecute. And who did it trample them? Who did it trample down? Israel. Okay? It trampled them down, on them, that is the Jews. Now in verse 11 here, he says he, this horn, who we know is Antiochus Epiphanes, made himself a prince or ruler or general. The word there is sar in the Hebrew. He made himself a ruler or general of the Tasaba, the angelic beings, the angelic army, to oppose or crush or stop the sacrifice in the temple of God. So what he's telling you here, Daniel, is even though Antiochus, as a human, came into the temple and committed the abomination of desolation, okay, that what really was happening spiritually was that it was the satanic plan to do it because he was trying to end the Jewish system of sacrifice and stamp it out. Okay? You get it?
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, think about this. He's saying that what's behind Antiochus's actions was satanic. It was astrological. It was fallen angelic beings. They were behind the persecution of the Jews that Antiochus caused. And since he is an acknowledged symbol of Antichrist, almost every commentator will say he's a type of future Antichrist, okay, then it shows who will be behind the persecution of the Jews during the tribulation period. It's the same game plan, played over again in another era of history. Okay?
So are you saying there's going to be another Hitler come to power?
He's called the Antichrist, but he's Hitler on steroids. Okay? So the point is, these things are appointed in the stars. They are in appointed times. Antiochus didn't invade and do what he did because it wasn't planned. It's because it was planned. In the same way, Antichrist will be revealed on the earth according to an appointed time. That's why, of course, it's silly to try to figure out what the time is, because it's an appointed time. It's going to happen when it's going to happen. You know?
God has a plan. It's the same as the appointed
Exactly.
time. Am I right?
Yes.
It's parallel circumstances.
So in the same way that Amos is talking about what they were doing and the appointed plan that occurred for their destruction because of it, you know, there's going to be an appointed plan Satan's going to enact again in the future during the 7-year tribulation to try to destroy God's people again. He did it with Hitler in World War II. He's going to do it again in the tribulation period with the Jews. So, at any rate.
Hitler, in turn, this goes to you, Hitler in any way, shape, or form really pursued Russia and taking it over besides its occupation and what from oil and every other resource. Would he have been after Russian Jews at that point, at that time as well? I mean, he killed everything in its place as he went through.
Well, is your question, was he killing Jews, Russian Jews as well?
Of course, killing all Jews.
But was that one of the, do you think that was one of the things he reasoned in his mind to just not only wipe out everyone that was in every other country? Because that's what he tried to do, is wipe out every Jewish person.
He did. And in Eastern Europe, he did an unbelievable job.
He did an unbelievable job. So they were bringing back, and from what I studied, Russian Jews out of Russia when they were retreating, after they told them not to retreat.
Yeah, I think it's
They brought them into Poland.
yeah. I don't know all the details of what you're asking.
Well,
Go ahead.
I think I will not be too wrong if I say that most of Russian Jews who lived at the time in the western part of Russia, they were, taken to the concentration camps and killed there. Most of them. Now those who survived, obviously then they were freed by, American army, by Russian army, by...
But you also had a significant number of Jews that worked in the factories in the Ural Mountains.
I'm talking about western part of
Okay, but I'm saying some of them got to move east of the Urals and were safe.
Now, for the ones I was talking about, they were to the Russians.
Yes.
They weren't safe. They
No.
ended up in Poland. And I just wondered from everything we talked about tonight, if Mr. Fisher himself, if he literally intended to do to the Russian Jews the same as he did to the Jews.
I don't think there's any question.